collapse of Nazi Germany in May 1945 marked the end of one of history's darkest chapters. Yet for a select group of children, the war's end was not liberation but the beginning of a lifelong struggle with an inheritance they never chose. These were the sons and daughters of the Third Reich's most notorious leaders, children who had grown up in privilege and luxury, unaware that their fathers were orchestrating humanity's greatest crimes. When the Nuremberg trials began exposing the full extent of Nazi atrocities, these children faced an impossible reality. The men they knew as loving fathers were revealed to be architects of genocide. Their surnames, once symbols of power and prestige, became marks of shame and suspicion. This documentary examines the lives of these children in the decades following World War II. Some chose to defend their fathers' legacies at any cost. Others completely rejected their family heritage. A few sought redemption through radically different paths. Their stories reveal the complex interplay between family loyalty, historical truth, and personal responsibility. What emerges is a portrait of how the sins of one generation can echo through the next, and how individuals respond when confronted with an unbearable family legacy. Gudrun Himmler, the unrepentant daughter. Born on August 8, 1929, Gudrun Himmler was the only child of Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, and chief architect of the Holocaust. From her earliest years, she lived within the inner circle of Nazi power, accompanying her father on official visits and appearing in photographs alongside high-ranking SS officers. The relationship between father and daughter was exceptionally close. They maintained daily telephone contact, and Himmler regularly sent flowers and gifts to his beloved Puppy, as he called her. When Himmler was appointed Reich Minister of the Interior in 1943, 12-year-old Gudrun wrote in her diary, "Papito, Minister of the Reich, I am crazy with joy." Her childhood was spent surrounded by the symbols and rhetoric of National Socialism. She attended Nazi youth organizations and was thoroughly indoctrinated in the ideology of racial superiority. At age 12, she was already writing about the war in personal terms, expressing anguish over the German attack on the Soviet Union while maintaining complete faith in her father's leadership. The family's privileged existence ended abruptly in May 1945. As Allied forces closed in, Gudrun and her mother fled to northern Italy, where they were captured by Allied forces. During interrogation and detention, Gudrun first learned the full extent of the accusations against her father. When news of Himmler's suicide reached her on May 23, 1945, the 15-year-old suffered a complete physical and emotional breakdown, remaining bedridden for weeks. However, rather than accepting the historical evidence of her father's crimes, Gudrun developed an alternative narrative. She convinced herself that Himmler had been murdered by the Allies, a belief she maintained throughout her life. Upon her release in 1946, she declared, "My name is Himmler, enough with the lies." From that point forward, Gudrun dedicated her life to rehabilitating her father's reputation. In 1951, she joined Stille Hilfe Silent Help, an organization providing financial and legal assistance to imprisoned or fugitive Nazi war criminals. She helped establish neo-Nazi youth organizations and maintained contact with former SS officers throughout her life. Her Munich apartment became a shrine to Nazi memorabilia, filled with photographs, medals, and busts of Heinrich Himmler. She traveled across Europe attending far-right gatherings and providing support to wanted war criminals, including Klaus Barbie and other notorious figures. When asked about her activities by journalists, Gudrun consistently refused to elaborate, stating simply, "I do not discuss my work." She died on May 24, 2018, at age 88, having never publicly acknowledged her father's role in the Holocaust or expressed any remorse for her own activities in support of Nazi fugitives. Edda Göring. From privilege to poverty. The birth of Edda Göring on June 2, 1938, was celebrated as a national event in Nazi Germany. 500 aircraft performed a flyover of Berlin to honor the arrival of Hermann Göring's only child. Adolf Hitler served as her godfather, and gifts poured in from across the Reich, including a Renaissance painting by Lucas Cranach the Elder, donated by the city of Cologne. Edda's early childhood unfolded at Carenhall, her father's sprawling estate 60 kilometers from Berlin. The property featured extensive hunting grounds, a swimming pool, private cinema, zoo, and miniature railway system. Her dollhouse was a perfect replica of the Potsdam Palace, complete with miniature furnishings and artwork. The Luftwaffe commissioned this gift specifically for the Reich Marshal's daughter. The child lived in complete isolation from the realities of war. While millions died across Europe, Edda enjoyed private theatrical performances organized by her father and received visits from international dignitaries, including Benito Mussolini and Charles Lindbergh. Her daily routine was managed by governesses and domestic staff, many of whom were prisoners assigned to the household. This fairy tale existence ended dramatically in January 1945, when mother and daughter fled to Austria ahead of advancing Soviet forces. Hermann Göring ordered the destruction of Carenhall to prevent its capture, though he first evacuated his extensive art collection using special trains. The family took refuge in Martendorf Castle, where they experienced the final collapse of the Third Reich. On April 23, 1945, Hitler ordered Göring's arrest for alleged treason, and SS guards placed the family under house arrest. 7-year-old Edda witnessed bombing raids from the castle's basement, while her father was confined separately in an unventilated cave. American forces detained the family on May 7, 1945. Edda's last memory of her father as a free man was watching him being led away from the castle, photographed alongside a Texas flag held by his captors. During the subsequent months of detention, Edda and her mother Emmy lived in various facilities across occupied Germany. They shared a single cell in Straubing prison, sleeping on a mattress covered with a blanket they claimed had been a gift from Mussolini. A fellow prisoner dressed as Saint Nicholas provided chocolate for Edda's Christmas in 1945. When Hermann Göring committed suicide with a cyanide capsule on October 15, 1946, hours before his scheduled execution, Emmy chose to tell 8-year-old Edda the truth about her father's death. The family's fall from luxury to poverty was complete. In her adult life, Edda maintained an apartment in Munich decorated with photographs and memorabilia from the Nazi era. She consistently refused media interviews, though she once told a journalist by telephone, "I love my father very much. You can write that." Other members of the Göring family made different choices regarding their legacy. Great-niece Bettina Göring chose sterilization to ensure the family name would end with her generation, while relative Matthias Göring converted to Judaism and emigrated to Israel. Wolf Rüdiger, the deputy's loyal son. The story of Wolf Rüdiger Hess begins with one of World War II's most bizarre episodes. On May 10, 1941, 3-year-old Wolf Rüdiger played with his father Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy and longtime confidant. Before departing on his secret mission, Hess concealed personal letters and his will among his son's toys, keeping a photograph of the child in his aviator uniform. That evening, Hess piloted a Messerschmitt Bf 110 on a solo flight to Scotland, attempting to negotiate a separate peace with Britain. The mission failed spectacularly. Hitler immediately denounced Hess as a traitor and ordered his name removed from all official documents and photographs. For Wolf Rüdiger, his father's flight meant a childhood spent largely without paternal presence. Rudolf Hess remained in Allied custody for the duration of the war, was tried at Nuremberg, and received a life sentence for conspiracy and crimes against peace. From 1947 until 1987, he was imprisoned in Berlin's Spandau prison, eventually becoming its sole remaining inmate. Father and son met 102 times during those 40 years of imprisonment, but these encounters were conducted under strict Allied supervision. Physical contact was prohibited, conversations were monitored, and the meetings maintained a formal, regulated atmosphere. Wolf Rüdiger was not permitted to embrace his father until 1982, when he was 45 years old. Rather than accepting the official narrative of his father's guilt, Wolf Rüdiger embarked on a lifelong campaign to rehabilitate Rudolf Hess's reputation. He portrayed his father not as a war criminal, but as a misunderstood peace negotiator who had acted heroically to prevent further bloodshed. Wolf Rüdiger refused to perform military service and authored 3 books defending his father's actions. He established an organization dedicated to investigating what he claimed was the systematic persecution of Rudolf Hess by the Allied powers. When Rudolf Hess died in Spandau on August 17, 1987, prison officials ruled the death a suicide. Wolf Rüdiger rejected this conclusion and demanded an independent autopsy in Munich. The results suggested possible signs of strangulation, which Wolf Rüdiger interpreted as evidence of murder by British intelligence services. Until his own death in 2001, Wolf Rüdiger maintained that his father had been assassinated to prevent his eventual release from prison. He promoted this theory through interviews, books, and conferences, never wavering in his belief in his father's innocence. The obsession with Rudolf Hess's legacy continued into the next generation. Wolf Rüdiger's son, Wolf Andreas Hess, created websites honoring his grandfather and was legally sanctioned in 2002 for Holocaust denial statements. In 2011, responding to concerns about neo-Nazi pilgrimages, authorities exhumed Rudolf Hess's remains and had them cremated. Despite these measures, his gravesite continues to attract hundreds of supporters annually. Niklas Frank, the condemning son. Niklas Frank's childhood in Nazi-occupied Poland provided him with direct exposure to the Holocaust's implementation. As the son of Hans Frank, Governor-General of occupied Poland, 4-year-old Niklas accompanied his mother on shopping expeditions to the Krakow ghetto, where she purchased jewelry and furs confiscated from Jewish families. From the car window, the child observed emaciated bodies and starving children who stared silently at the passing vehicle. At home, family conversations casually referenced the ghetto as a source of luxury goods obtainable at minimal cost. His mother would return from these expeditions with carpets, jewelry, and fine objects, displaying no awareness of the human suffering that had produced them. The Frank family occupied Wall Castle in Krakow, from where Hans Frank administered the general government territory. The residents flew the Reich flag and maintained the full ceremonial trappings of Nazi power. Frank's wife referred to her husband as the King of Poland, while the family lived in luxury surrounded by stolen artwork and treasures. Hans Frank, originally Hitler's personal lawyer, had been tasked with providing legal justification for Nazi policies. In his role as Governor-General, he organized mass deportations to death camps and delivered speeches declaring that the more Jews who died, the better. His personal diaries, later submitted as evidence at Nuremberg, contained detailed records of these activities. When Germany collapsed in 1945, Hans Frank fled to Bavaria with his family, taking stolen Renaissance paintings including works by Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci. American forces captured him on May 4, 1945. During his final meeting with his family, Frank distributed 50,000 marks to his wife without displaying any emotional response, according to witnesses. At the Nuremberg trials, Hans Frank attempted suicide twice before his execution on October 16, 1946. 7-year-old Niklas did not cry upon learning of his father's death. He later recalled that his father had promised to spend Christmas together, a promise that would never be fulfilled. Unlike other Nazi children who defended or ignored their father's crimes, Niklas Frank chose complete condemnation. He became a journalist and in 1993 published Mein Vater eine Abrechnung, My Father, a Reckoning, in which he described Hans Frank as a slaughterer, coward, and lickspittle. For years, Niklas carried a photograph of his father's corpse and became obsessed with concentration camp imagery, attempting to imagine himself as a victim. He frequently stated, "His guilt is our inheritance." His anger extended beyond his father to include his mother, whom he viewed as equally culpable. In a shocking admission, Niklas revealed that during a 1959 hospital visit, he attempted to poison his mother with medication. She died on March 9, 1963, coincidentally Niklas's birthday. The Frank siblings chose divergent paths in dealing with their family legacy. Norman emigrated to Argentina in 1951, where he was welcomed by Nazi sympathizers, but later returned to Germany, maintaining photographs of his father until his death in 2009. Sigrid moved to South Africa, supported apartheid policies, and denied the Holocaust. Brigitte, suffering from cancer, committed suicide in 1981. Niklas Frank became his father's most relentless critic and chronicler. He openly condemns other Nazi descendants who attempt to rehabilitate their parents' reputations. Regarding Martin Bormann Jr., he wrote, "It is disgusting to try to whitewash guilt behind the image of a loving father." Currently residing in northern Hamburg, Niklas Frank delivers lectures in schools about the dangers of fascism and authoritarianism. He frequently states, "I love the Germans, but I do not trust them," reflecting his belief that latent sympathy for Nazi ideology persists in German society. Martin Adolf, from Godson to priest. Martin Adolf Bormann's transformation from Hitler's godson to Catholic priest represents perhaps the most dramatic ideological reversal among Nazi children. Born on April 14, 1930, he was the firstborn son of Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and eventual successor to Rudolf Hess as the Nazi Party's second most powerful figure. Adolf Hitler personally served as the child's godfather, and Martin Adolf grew up in Obersalzberg among the children of other Nazi leaders. His father controlled access to Hitler, managed the Führer's personal finances, and supervised the implementation of Nazi policies across occupied Europe. The Bormann household strictly adhered to Nazi ideology. Christianity was rejected, and Martin Adolf was excluded from religious instruction at school. His mother advocated polygamy as a means of strengthening the Reich's racial composition. When asked at age 10 to define National Socialism, Martin Adolf replied, "It means fulfilling the Führer's will." At age 10, Martin Bormann sent his son to a Reich school in Feldafing as punishment for unspecified infractions. There, Martin Adolf received military training alongside other children of Nazi officials. The regimen was harsh, but he adapted to the institutional environment, seeing his parents only during school holidays. The school closed in April 1945 as Allied forces approached. On May 1, Martin Adolf heard radio reports of Hitler's death, followed by an eerie silence that profoundly affected him. A former associate of his father advised the boy to burn his Hitler Youth uniform, assume a false identity, and disappear entirely. Martin Adolf adopted the surname Bergmann and sought refuge with a farming family in Hinterthal, posing as an orphan. The Catholic family that sheltered him provided his first genuine exposure to Christian faith. Through participation in catechism classes and religious study, he began to understand the true nature of the Nazi regime. When concentration camp footage was shown in local cinemas, Martin Adolf finally comprehended his father's role in the Holocaust. In 1947, he confessed his true identity to the village priest, who provided unconditional support and guidance. On May 4, 1947, Martin Adolf was baptized as a Catholic. He subsequently studied theology and was ordained as a priest in 1958. His religious vocation included missionary work in the Congo during the 1960s, where he endured torture and mock executions at the hands of rebel forces. Returning to Germany in 1971, Martin Adolf married a former nun and taught religious education in various schools until his retirement in 1992. He participated in reconciliation meetings between Nazi descendants and Holocaust survivors, and in 1993 undertook an ecumenical mission to Israel. Martin Adolf never reunited with his father after the war. Martin Bormann's fate remained unknown until 1972, when construction workers in Berlin discovered skeletal remains that were identified through dental records and genetic testing as belonging to the former Nazi leader. Throughout his adult life, Martin Adolf feared that his father might return to confront him about his religious conversion and rejection of Nazi ideology. He maintained that while he did not hate his father, he completely condemned his actions and believed each individual must accept responsibility for their own moral choices. Several of Martin Adolf's siblings died young or remained outside public attention. His sister Ilse, who maintained Nazi sympathies, died in 1957. His mother Gerda was baptized as a Catholic before her death in 1946. Martin Adolf Bormann died on March 11, 2013, remembered as one of the few children of high-ranking Nazi officials who completely severed ties with their inherited ideology. His life represented a conscious choice to pursue reconciliation and bridge-building rather than perpetuating the hatred and division of his father's generation. The Speer Legacy, Architects of Distance. The 6 children of Albert Speer faced the complex legacy of a father who had successfully rebranded himself in post-war Germany. Speer, Hitler's chief architect, and wartime armaments minister, emerged from the Nuremberg trials as the repentant Nazi, serving 20 years in Spandau prison before returning to public life as a best-selling author and media personality. Albert Speer Jr., born in 1934, became an internationally renowned urban planner, leading his firm ASP in projects across Europe, Asia, and the Persian Gulf. His architectural philosophy emphasized sustainability and human-centered design, deliberately contrasting with his father's monumental Nazi aesthetics. He participated in planning stadiums for Qatar's 2022 World Cup and developed concepts for modern cities focused on environmental responsibility. During his childhood in Obersalzberg, Albert Jr. lived alongside the children of other Nazi leaders, while his father gained increasing influence in Hitler's inner circle. The family's lifestyle changed dramatically after 1945, moving from a luxury residence to a cramped two-room apartment. The Speer surname became a liability. Albert Jr. was rejected from multiple schools due to his family name. At age 15, he began training as a carpenter, later managing to enter the Technical University of Munich to study architecture. In 1964, he won a design competition for Ludwigshafen station while submitting anonymously, believing his family name would have disqualified him from consideration. During Albert Speer Sr.'s 20-year imprisonment, 1946 to 1966, family relationships remained minimal and emotionally distant. The children described prison visits as uncomfortable encounters lacking warmth or genuine connection. Ernst, the youngest son, barely remembered his father and remained silent during visits. Fritz felt uncomfortable, while Arnold appeared more interested in the prison's architecture than in reconnecting with his father. Meanwhile, Speer Sr. maintained extensive correspondence and walked daily circuits in the prison courtyard, calculating that he had covered distances equivalent to traveling around the world. He coordinated financial support for his family through architect Rudolf Walters and planned for his children's education and future careers. When released in 1966, Speer Sr.'s reunion with his adult children was awkward and distant. He showed little interest in their personal experiences or emotional development, focusing instead on re-establishing his professional reputation through books and media appearances. Hilde Speer became a sociologist and environmental activist, promoting intercultural dialogue and participating in local politics. In 2004, she received the Moses Mendelssohn Prize for her work in promoting reconciliation between German and Jewish communities. The ceremony was originally planned for a synagogue, but moved to a church after the Jewish community objected to honoring the daughter of a high-ranking Nazi official. Margaret Speer chose photography as her profession, and in 2007 published Sind Sie Speers Tochter, meaning Are You Speer's Daughter, documenting her experience as a Nazi leader's child. She described her father as emotionally distant and self-absorbed, more concerned with his public rehabilitation than with family relationships. Ernst lived on the same property as his parents without establishing meaningful emotional connections. Fritz and Arnold maintained similar emotional distance, while Hilde remained the only child who developed a closer relationship with her father, assisting with his correspondence and public image until his death in 1981. After Speer Sr.'s death in London in 1981, historians discovered documents contradicting his carefully constructed narrative of being an apolitical architect. Evidence revealed his active participation in deportations and knowledge of the extermination system, undermining the good Nazi image he had cultivated through his memoirs and media appearances. Hilde Speer later observed, "Guilt cannot be inherited, but shame can be." Each Speer child found individual ways to process this inherited shame while maintaining the family name and building independent professional identities. Rolf Mengele, the doctor's reluctant son. The case of Rolf Mengele presents perhaps the most psychologically complex relationship between a Nazi child and his criminal father. Rolf grew up believing that Joseph Mengele, the notorious angel of death of Auschwitz, had died heroically in combat. The man living in South America under the alias Uncle Fritz was presented as a distant family relative. Rolf discovered his father's true identity at age 16. The revelation was devastating, as schoolmates had already identified him through his surname, calling him Little Nazi or SS Mengele. The Mengele name carried particular infamy due to Joseph's role in conducting horrific medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners, particularly children and twins. At home, discussion of Josef Mengele remained taboo. Outside, the family name made Rolf a social pariah. The psychological burden of this inherited identity shaped his formative years and adult relationships. In 1977, at age 33, Rolf made an extraordinary decision to travel to Brazil and confront the father he had never truly known. Using a friend's passport and traveling under false identity to avoid detection by Nazi hunters, he spent 2 weeks with Josef Mengele in São Paulo. The meeting revealed a man living in modest circumstances, appearing physically diminished and psychologically fragile. During their extensive conversations, Josef Mengele consistently denied direct responsibility for his wartime actions. He claimed to have merely followed orders, insisted that Auschwitz's extermination operations had been established before his arrival, and maintained that his role had been limited to selecting prisoners capable of work. Throughout these discussions, Josef Mengele showed no remorse for his actions and maintained his Nazi ideological beliefs. He expressed no acknowledgement of the suffering he had caused or recognition of the moral implications of his conduct. Despite his complete rejection of his father's worldview and actions, Rolf never reported Josef's location to authorities or cooperated with those seeking to bring him to justice. When Josef Mengele drowned on a Brazilian beach in 1979, while using the identity Wolfgang Gerhard, Rolf traveled to collect his personal effects, including notebooks, letters, sketches, and a watch. Rather than turning these materials over to investigators, Rolf retained them privately. In 2011, the collection was auctioned for nearly $250,000, purchased by a Holocaust survivor's descendant who believed the documents should be made public to combat Holocaust denial. In the 1980s, Rolf made a definitive break with his inherited identity. He abandoned the Mengele surname, adopting his wife's family name instead. He established himself as a lawyer in Munich, choosing his profession as a means of ensuring his own children would grow up free from the burden of their grandfather's crimes. Rolf refused to provide genetic samples that might have helped identify his father's remains and did not participate in the official exhumation process. His reluctance stemmed partly from a desire to protect those who had assisted Josef Mengele in South America, and partly from his determination to distance himself completely from his family's past. In 2008, Rolf publicly expressed his desire to visit Israel and the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial. He stated that his hesitation came not from personal fear, but from respect for potential discomfort his presence might cause Holocaust survivors and their families. Rolf Mengele represents a unique case among Nazi children, the only one who directly confronted his father about his wartime actions. Though he received no apology or acknowledgement of guilt, this encounter shaped his subsequent decision to completely separate himself from his inherited legacy and build an entirely new identity for himself and his descendants. The stories of these Nazi children reveal the complex and enduring impact of inherited historical guilt. Their responses to their family legacies varied dramatically, from complete loyalty to total rejection, from public advocacy to private shame. These varying responses illustrate that inherited guilt is not automatically transferred between generations. Each individual faced a choice about how to respond to their family history. Some chose denial, others confrontation, and still others sought transformation through alternative paths. The historical significance of these cases extends beyond individual family dynamics. They demonstrate how authoritarian ideologies can persist through family loyalty, how historical truth can be denied or distorted, and how some individuals can transcend even the darkest inherited legacies. Perhaps most importantly, these stories remind us that while we cannot choose our family origins or historical circumstances, we retain the fundamental human capacity to choose our moral responses to inherited burdens. The children of Nazi leaders were not responsible for their fathers' crimes, but their adult choices regarding those legacies remain subjects of legitimate historical and moral evaluation. Their stories continue to resonate today as societies worldwide grapple with questions of historical responsibility, inherited guilt, and the complex relationship between family loyalty and moral accountability.